Okay, now I know what you're thinking. Dalkora, we already have so many variations of Bash. And there's the new Flay build that our man Rob has been showcasing quite a lot on YouTube recently, which he's been pushing very, very high with in the pit. But do you know what most of those builds have in common? They're just really annoying to make. And the biggest reason for this is that they require you to level a rogue up so that you can get access to the critical strike damage tempers, because those are needed to scale gushing wounds on those builds. So what if I told you there was a version of those builds that doesn't require you to make another class and has a much lower gear requirement, so it's more reasonable to expect to actually get this build for those of you who don't, I don't know, RMT, stream, or just have the most ungodly RNG known to mankind. So now that I have you adequately warmed up, I'll stop fondling your Tesla balls and we'll get into the build, starting with the skill tree. Kicking things off, of course, we have Bash. We got max ranks into Bash. We only go into Enhanced. We don't take the advanced nodes here because we can't actually use those benefits. We go all the way down then to the defensive node. And actually, just a quick note, the reason I have +4 ranks into everything, just to avoid confusion, is because I have a Harlequin Crest Uber Unique equipped. But we do go into Imposing Presence. We've got Martial Figure, very important damage reduction there. We've got Tactical Iron Skin. Now, this seems to be a little bugged because we're getting a full heal every time we use this, not just like the heal per second that it mentions in the tooltip. So I don't know if anyone at Blizzard could take a look at that, see if that's actually a bug or what. Going then down to the Brawling tree, we have Enhanced Warcry, which is giving us our source of berserking and a nice little damage boost. We are using Challenging Shout, by the way, but we don't have a point in it because we don't need a point in it because we're using Harlequin's Crest to be able to, actually put that on our bar and use it. We then have Booming Voice and Guttural Yell for increased duration and then damage reduction when our shouts are up. We've got Aggressive Resistance, of course, for damage reduction. Swiftness, because going fast, always good. We have Pit Fighter for increased damage and damage reduction. No Mercy for crit chance against stunned and immobilized slowed enemy, or CC'd enemies, I guess is a better way to say that. And then Slaying Strike, which is going to help us deal with pit bosses when they are at their most dangerous, which is in that last sort of section of their HP, because that's when the Lilith shadow starts to spawn, and you just want to get through them as fast as possible. And 23% multiplicative damage, that's insane. After that, we've gone into Warrior's Rupture. This is going to be a really important skill for us because it procs our Pain Gorges on all of the enemies affected by the bleed, but also gives us a ginormous 40% attack speed boost for 5 seconds. So this is giga OP for this build. We've got Fighter's Steel Grasp to drag enemies in, as well as making them vulnerable and giving us berserking. So that's a double whammy. And we have Thick Skin into counter offensive. Now, I do have 2 extra points in here, which you could move over to defensive stance if you're finding that you're feeling a little bit squishy. Finally, over on the ultimate tree here, we have Duelist for some attack speed, Wallop because we are using a one-handed mace, and I'll talk more about our weapon setup in just a second, and Concussion. It's important not to go over 9 ranks on Concussion because, really at that point you're dipping into diminishing returns, and 100% is a pretty high amount, so we can spend points in other places. And then our key passive is Unconstrained because this is a Berserk style build, and this is really just one of the most powerful, if not the powerful, key passive for like 99% of builds. Now, as promised, we're going to go over and take a look at the arsenal setup. So first and foremost, if you press S when you're in game, we'll make sure we have our attacks set up for the right weapons. So Bash, you want to be using dual wield. Now, it's important that you have a one-handed mace or you won't even be able to choose this option. But we also want a one-handed axe, and I'll talk more about that in just a second. And then the same for Rupture. You want to also make sure that you're using dual wield for this so that you get access to the expertise for those weapon types. Now, to bring up your class passive window, or whatever you want to call it, this expertise window, press Shift-C in game. Set your technique to two-handed axe. This will increase the damage to vulnerable enemies by 10%. This is really, really, really good. But here is the reason we are using a one-handed axe. If you read the tooltip here, when using an axe, and we have one in our hand, we get an increased crit chance against injured enemies, which is 10% extra, which is really, really, really nice. But we also get critical strikes have up to a 55% chance to grant 6% attack speed for 2 seconds, which we're going to be proccing an awful lot. So this is really, really, really nice because it synergizes with this build across the board, because this build just scales really, really well with attack speed. And the reason we're using a mace is, as I mentioned before, so we can get access to wallop and concussion. Okay, and now we're going to break down the gear. I will have a build planner with the ideal stats recommended in it. Just bear in mind that what you're seeing on screen now is just the gear that I was able to get and does not necessarily represent the best gear you can have. Now, for my helmet, I do have a Harlequin crest, which is an uber unique, but you can absolutely get away with using a Urit if you have one of those instead. It's really not that much less powerful. Now, moving on to the chest piece, you're going to want some combination of strength, armor, and resistance and max life. The reason I say combination is because depending on what your character currently needs, you'll need to prioritize different stats, right? So for example, I may have armor on my chest, but you may have armor on your pants, meaning that you would have max life on your chest. You'll just have to be kind of aware of what you're missing. You can check the stat sheet here to see if your armor cap, 9,230 being the cap, and you can check here for your resistances to make sure those are capped. There really isn't a one-size-fits-all, so I wish I could give you a better answer, but yeah, just any combination of those, and you need to prioritize what you're currently missing. You need to hit those caps as well, or you'll be getting hit like a goddamn truck. As far as tempers go, you can use Iron Skin cooldown reduction, or you can use Challenging Shout cooldown reduction. Both of those are very, very good choices. And then you go into Concussion. And again, with Concussion, I'll say it again because you don't want to go over 10 ranks here. So if you hit 2+3s, that's all you're going to need across all of your gear. As for our aspect, we have got Might. Might is a flat 20% damage reduction for this build, which is mega OP. For our gloves, we have Pain Gorges, and this is the reason that we're using Rupture, because when we Rupture and we cause that big bleed AoE, it applies this debuff to all enemies around us for 8 seconds, and that allows us to do absolutely mental AoE. If you are lucky enough to be farming greater affix versions of these gloves, if you hit attack speed or crit chance, you're absolutely laughing. As for masterworking, crit chance or attack speed are what I would be looking to target. Moving on to the pants then, again, some combination of strength, armor, a resistance, max life, but one thing you absolutely must have is ranks to bash. This is going to help boost your damage really, really nicely. Then as far as tempers go, you're going to go for Concussion. Again, if you've got already 6 ranks to Concussion on your gear, then you want to go for Stun or CC Duration on the gear instead. And Imposing Presence. Imposing Presence is massive. This is a gigantic, absolutely huge HP boost. So definitely try and make sure you're hitting that roll first, in my opinion. As far as the aspect goes, we have Iron Warrior. This boosts Iron Skin's value through the fucking roof. We get 35% damage reduction as well as an unstoppable while it's active. Moving on to boots, we have the Implicit Attacks Reduce Fades cooldown. This is really nice, feels very slick, allows us to get out of trouble quite a lot. However, Triple Evade is also just as good, kind of a personal preference thing. Then when it comes to the stats, we have Strength, Max Life, and Movement Speed. You can actually flex out life for like a resistance or for armor if you didn't hit it on your other pieces of armor as well. Then for tempers, we've gone for movement speed and concussion again. The aspect of choice here, we've gone for Hectic. Hectic gives us just an insane amount of cooldown reduction while using Bash. Every 5 Bash attacks gives us a 2-second cooldown on one of our active cooldowns, allowing us to spam things an ungodly amount. Now for weapons, luckily we actually want the exact same stats on all 4 of these, which is Strength, Max Life, Vulnerable, Damage to Close, and Bash Cleaves. The reason we go for Vulnerable over Crit is because Pain Gorges cannot crit, so we can only scale it with Vulnerable. But Crit is still a decent option, but Vulnerable is definitely better. You can see I still have some crit on my gear, just is what it is. As far as greater affix priority goes, you want to try and hit Vulnerable and Strength, with Strength being the primary. And if for Masterworking, you want to try and hit Bash Cleaves. For your aspects, you want Moonrise on one of your 2-handers and Edge Masters on the other. For your 1-handers, you have Inner Calm and you have Rapid. Moving on to jewelry now, you will have to get a resistance on one of your rings, and then you'll have to get Lucky Hit chance to make enemies vulnerable on the other. Other than those two stats, what you want to try and prioritize getting is strength and also crit or attack speed, with your greater affix priority being crit and attack speed. Now, as far as tempers go, you're going to want to try and go for Warcry cooldown. I messed up. I got Brawling. There you go, is what it is. And then damage too close. Then, as far as aspects go, we're using elements for the multiplicative damage boost, and we've got bold chieftains for that nice, juicy cooldown reduction on our shouts. Now, moving up to the amulet, and there are quite a few good choices here, but I think a perfect amulet would look something like this. It would have attack speed, it would have cooldown reduction, and ranks to counter offensive on it. However, strength percentage and also crit chance are not terrible options either if you happen to hit those. As far as tempers go, you can use Iron Skin cooldown reduction or Challenging Shout cooldown reduction, and then damage too close as the final temper as well. Greater affix priority here would definitely be on cooldown reduction and ranks to counter offensive. However, you're looking pretty good if you hit a greater affix on any of the good stats. And then for masterworking, you want to try and hit the cooldown reduction or the attack speed / crit or counter offensive. And then finally, we have the aspect, which is the aspect of adaptability. Adaptability. And then finally, we have the aspect of adaptability. And then finally, we have the aspect of adaptability. Fuck. And then finally, we have the aspect of adaptability, which didn't take me 25 tries to say. And that gives us a gigantic boost to the damage of our basic skills. And now finally, looking at the Paragon board, I'm only going to go through the core parts here. I'm not going to go through every single point, of course. And just to remind you, there is the build plan down in the description, which will have the Paragon board in it for you as well. But on our first board here, we have Aya for the damage while berserking bonus, as well as the damage reduction. Now, the reason we have damage while berserking at all in this build is actually Blood Rage, the Paragon node here, which gives us a 26%, and this scales up to 30, damage bonus based on our damage while berserking. So we want to stack this up as much as possible because we're double dipping into that damage. It's really, really, really powerful. And just to point out here, there is a common misconception with this. A lot of people kind of get confused with the way that this is worded, and to be fair, so did I for a long time. But you don't have to kill a bleeding enemy to get the damage bonus. That's a separate thing that gives you berserking when you kill bleeding enemies. But we do bleed enemies anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Then on this board, we have Undaunted for the damage reduction as well as the little damage boost that it gives us. Now, with this build as well, one thing that we're doing that's a little unusual is taking the Berserk duration nodes. We don't usually do this, but we are, because we don't have as much Berserk uptime as we usually do with a lot of builds like this. Over to the right here, we have Ambidextrous for a damage boost and also a boost to all of the blue nodes near it on the Carnage board, which gives us a nice bit of attack speed. Then over on the far right here, we have Territorial giving us a damage boost as well as damage reduction. And then we have Decimator, my bad, for another damage boost. Very, very good. Up in the top left here, we're going for the Warbringer board. We get the All Resist nodes on here, which are very valuable. We've got Exploit sitting in here for the damage to vulnerable enemies, as well as a nice little extra source of vulnerable, which is always good. Got some max life stuff up here as well. You don't necessarily have to go for this if you don't feel like you need it, but you can. And then finally, we have the Flawless Technique board with Cleaver sitting in it. And Cleaver gives us a huge damage boost if we're wielding an axe, which we are. And we have a couple of really nice nodes over here. See, we've got some damage reduction from close, which is boosted, as well as some crit and stuff like that. So very, very nice nodes up here for that. But that's the Paragon board. That's the build. Like I said, you know, it's all in-house. It's all on the BARB. You don't have to make other classes. And you don't even really need an Uber Unique to get this one up and running. And anyways, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoy the build. Let me know that you did by, I don't know, leaving a like, maybe subbing to the channel. And I'll catch you on the next one. Love ya. Bye.